was particularly upsetting is that during all the weeks and months of the bad publicity that started at the initial time of arrest and was ratcheted up, nobody said that during the 2 to 3 months a year, every summer, that Varsha and Mahenda and the kids all went overseas for anywhere from 2 to 3 months. The maids who were alleged to have been enslaved were alone in a house for 60 to 90 days every single summer. And there was no question that there were no locks, they could walk out at any time. The fact that that was never mentioned in all the weeks and months of publicity until literally it came out of trial. And even in trial, when you read the newspaper articles of what happened in court, that wasn't mentioned.
Well, it was said they hid them in the closets, they beat them up, there was forced labor, physical, psychological abuse. My question is, in the trial now, at this point of time, do you have any newly found evidence that goes in favor of Sabnani's, so that when you make that appeal after the sentencing, it might help them?
Well, we have evidence that occurred, and one of the examples is one of the main witnesses was a woman who worked for Mahenda Sabnani. Even though she came to court and testified, as she did, she was a woman who was the sole support of herself, had some medical problems and needed both the job and the medical coverage. To this day, she still works for Mahenda Sabnani. To this day, he still pays her salary. Monsters don't do that. The kind of people that were portrayed by him don't do that. And interestingly, at the end of the trial, we found that she had sent an email to a federal government agent indicating that she hoped that there would be a conviction. Now, that's, if that isn't an indication of her having some serious prejudice for whatever reason and wherever it came from, you know, I've been doing this for 40 years. You really rarely find something like that. And we think that that, amongst other similar situations, may well lead to a reversal of the case.
What's interesting
on appeal.
What's interesting is that of the 4 alternate jurors, 3 of them were shocked by the verdict. 3 of them thought the verdict was wrong. And one of the jurors on the regular panel, when they spoke to the press afterwards, asked the judge to be lenient in the sentence. So the government's case was starting to unravel. And I think had we had an objective, fair jury, I think this case would have gone the other way. What we
so do you feel that you're going to appeal on the basis that the jury could have been biased and prejudiced against them?
Well, that's a big part of our appeal. Right from the get-go, it was apparent that this jury was biased and prejudiced. Well, not the jury pool was biased and prejudiced. And then when we heard of the jurors shouting in the parking lot, guilty, guilty, then it was very troubling to us. But we're fortunate to have a Court of Appeals that gives us an opportunity to present all of these arguments fairly and fully, and we're going to do that. And we're very hopeful that at that point we get a new trial. Right. And if we get a new trial, we'll do something that should hopefully resolve this jury prejudice issue. And if we get a fair trial, then I think we win.
Do you feel that the appellate court is going to give you a new trial and you can start the case all over again with some more evidence that goes in favor of the couple?
Well, it's not, just to comment on that, it's not for us to say what the Court of Appeals is going to do, except that we do believe that in the Court of Appeals we're going to get a fair shake. And that's all we're looking for. If we get a fair shake, and I know we will get that in the Court of Appeals, I think we'll be able to make our point. I hope we will.
I'll give you another example of what occurred, which I think we didn't find out until trial, but would be very different if we now had a new trial. With all the allegations of the physical harm that was alleged to have occurred over the 5-year period to the maid who, the housekeeper who initially left, we found that every single medical test taken of her, every blood test, every examination, showed that she was either normal or in the above normal range. There was not one medical test that came back showing any problem, such as malnutrition, for example. Allegedly, she was kept on a diet of a few pieces of bread a day. That would certainly show up as malnutrition. It would certainly show up in blood tests. I don't think most people getting the battery of tests who did not claim that kind of abuse, normal people, would have every result come back perfect, and yet in this instance it did. That's the kind of thing I think that would be out there in the news before another trial and was never heard from until the trial.
The judge never asked for those tests from the maids?
Well, that didn't occur until the government called the doctors who oversaw their treatment, and on cross-examination of those doctors and finally getting the medical documents to look at, the doctor literally sat there and admitted that every single test came back that the person was absolutely fine.
We weren't suggesting that the judge didn't do the right thing. The judge had nothing to do with that. What Mr. Hoffman was saying, that none of that favorable stuff ended up in the newspapers.
It never ended up in that trial?
No, in the trial it did, but nothing ever hit the newspapers. All the
I see.
stories in the newspapers were always negative. Whenever there were any positive things that happened.
But if this stuff hit the trial and it was brought up, how come the jury never looked at it, deliberated on it, and the prosecutors never thought about this part of evidence?
Well, think about it. Suppose you're a juror from a certain area, and all that you've seen and heard for months and months and months and months and months is that Varsha Sabnani was a terrible person, enslaved the housekeepers, and treated them poorly. And that's your mindset. Now, all that has to be overcome in a few-week trial. And you have to go back to your community, all of whom believe that, who have not been at the trial, who have not seen any of the evidence, and explain to them, if you vote for an acquittal, why you did. It's a very difficult thing to overcome when there's that kind of publicity. Think of it this way. Suppose the initial publicity had included in all the newspaper articles that the maids were free to leave anytime, but particularly during 60 to 90 days every summer when there was no one there, and that there was medical evidence that they had absolutely nothing wrong with them. Do you think if that was what had been in the newspapers for months and months prior to trial, there might have been a different mindset by the jury pool?
So you feel that the negative publicity that was generated before and during around the trial has been detrimental to this case completely?
Absolutely.
Now, at this point of time, of course, Mr. Mahendra Sabnani is in home confinement and Varsha Sabnani is in prison. The house, the couple is planning to buy it back again from the state because they said it was a scene of crime, so the state took the house as well. Are they going to get the house back? Are they going to pay for the house to get it back?
Well, that issue hasn't finally been resolved.
Correct.
So we can't comment on that.
That's
but
an appeals issue
Okay.
as to whether or not that's an appropriate taking. The Court of Appeals may find it was not, and we certainly hope they'll find it was not.
And what about the children that are minor? I mean, the boy is still going to school.
Two of the children are still going to
Two of the
school.
children. Now, in this situation where both parents are...
Actually, I'm sorry, three of the children are still
Three of the
school.
children are minors. In
Oh,
this,
they're not minors. One is
One-
under 18. About three of the children are going to school.
Okay. What is going to be their future? I mean, I know you're defending Mahendra Sabnani and you're defending Varsha. What happens to these young kids? I mean,